abilities to come and negotiate and to represent and to seek things that will build and allow us to be a better state. We pray now that that would bless us with a capacity and ability to work positively, to be able to be blessed with civility, to be blessed with understanding and ability to listen and to value various points of view. We pray that that would bless those that do this work, that they would be able to negotiate in good faith and to arrive at outcomes that will preserve those rights and those attributes that thou blessed us with. We pray for, again, this state, that things may move forward, that we'll be able to find resolve and balance those things that are important with those things that must happen. And again, we thank thee above all for the incomparable gift of thy Son. May we work to be more like him in how we treat others, how we view others, is our prayer now in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Stake President Jeannot. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The House will please come to order. Chairman Olson, do you have a privilege?
Yes, privilege of the floor, Mr. Speaker.
Please.
Over here in the South Gallery, folks, we are joined by some students. Go ahead and stand up, guys, all of you, so we can see your smiling faces. These are sixth graders from Pioneer Park with Miss Horn.
Welcome to the House, and I heard you guys did a really good job on the Pledge of Allegiance. People were watching you. You guys did great. And Representative Conrad, do you have a privilege?
Yes, sir. Mr. Speaker and members of the House, privilege of the floor.
Please.
I'd like to recognize the best constituent in House District 19 and my beloved wife of 33 years, Lori Conrad, please.
Welcome to the House. Anybody else? Representative Sherwood, do you have a privilege?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is the beginning of National Random Acts of Kindness Week. This is held every week of Valentine's Day, and the goal is to encourage people to think of ways to be kind to family, friends, and strangers. Here in Wyoming, Kindness Wyoming is a nonprofit that promotes Random Act of Kindness Week, and they have challenged us through their partnership with Leadership Wyoming to a Random Acts of Kindness bingo. So the House and the Senate are in competition to see who can fill out their bingo cards first. So some of the things that are on here are buy a coffee for someone without them knowing, thank a staff member who works late on a bill, write a note of appreciation. So this bingo card will be on my desk. There's some blank spots here to create your own random act of kindness if you don't see it here. And again, we are in competition with the Senate, and whichever side wins will get pastries. Thank you.
All right. Representative Pendergraft, do you have a privilege of the floor?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Privilege of the floor.
Please.
Up here on the balcony, Bob and Vicki Winnie on their 52nd wedding anniversary.
Hey! Welcome to the House. Are there any more privileges? No? All right. Journal Committee report.
Your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of February 10th, 2023 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Chestick and Ward.
So in the back there, we have our physician assistant of the day, Chris Sherwin. And so give her a big round of applause. Thank you for coming. And we have another guest, but I'm not sure who it is. So it might be a nurse practitioner, but I didn't get a name. I don't know for sure. No. Okay, that's good. All righty. Well, let's see. The next thing is we're at that order of business of Senate files on first reading. The first Senate file for our consideration is Senate File 108.
Senate File 108, sponsored by Senator Nethercott.
First reading of the bill.
Court reporter fees, district court discretion.
Senate File 108 is referred to Committee Number 1 Judiciary. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 129.
Senate File 129, sponsored by Senator Landon.
First reading of the bill.
Background checks, Governor's Office.
Senate File 129 is referred to Committee Number 1 Judiciary. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 167.
Senate File 167, sponsored by Senator Nethercott.
First reading of the bill.
Domestic Violence Protection Hearings, remote appearance.
Senate File 167 is referred to Committee Number 1 Judiciary. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 94.
Senate File 94, sponsored by Senator Ellis.
First reading of the bill.
Federal Indian Child Welfare Act codification.
Senate File 94 is referred to Committee Number 2 Appropriations. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 138.
Senate File 138, sponsored by Senator Kolb.
First reading of the bill.
Unemployment insurance coverage period and reporting.
Senate File 138 is referred to Committee Number 2 Appropriations. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 159.
Senate File 159, sponsored by Senator Beitman.
First reading of the bill.
Stop ESG, Eliminate Economic Boycott Act.
Senate File 159 is referred to Committee Number 2 Appropriations. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 172.
Senate File 172, sponsored by Senator Beitman.
First reading of the bill.
Stop ESG, State Funds Fiduciary Duty Act.
Senate File 172 is referred to Committee Number 2 Appropriations. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 112.
Senate File 112, sponsored by Senator Nethercott.
First reading of the bill.
Peer support counseling, confidentiality.
Senate File 112 is referred to Committee Number 3 Revenue. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 132.
Senate File 132, sponsored by Senator Ellis.
First reading of the bill.
Study of K through 12 education program.
Senate File 132 is referred to Committee Number 4 Education. The next bill, File 137.
Senate File 137, sponsored by Senator Steinmetz.
First reading of the bill.
Subdivisions, fencing requirements.
Senate File 137 is referred to Committee Number 5 Agriculture. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 128.
Senate File 128, sponsored by Senator Hicks.
First reading of the bill.
Transfer of state lands exchange.
Senate File 128 is referred to Committee Number 6 Travel. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 113.
Senate File 113, sponsored by Senator Pappas.
First reading of the bill.
Architects Practice Act amendments.
Senate File 113 is referred to Committee Number 7 Corporations. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 127.
Senate File 127, sponsored by Blockchain.
First reading of the bill.
Wyoming Stable Act Token Act.
Senate File 127 is referred to Committee Number 7 Corporations. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 153.
Senate File 153, sponsored by Senator Boner.
First reading of the bill.
Election security.
Senate File 153 is referred to Committee Number 7 Corporations. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 123.
Senate File 123, sponsored by Senator Boner.
First reading of the bill.
Military dependents, school choice.
Senate File 123 is referred to Committee Number 8 Transportation. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 141.
Senate File 141, sponsored by Senator Pappas.
First reading of the bill.
Transportation Technology Transfer Center Program funding.
Senate File 141 is referred to Committee Number 8 Transportation. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 154.
Senate File 154, sponsored by Senator Cooper.
First reading of the bill.
Energy Authority Project Financing, refineries.
Senate File 154 is referred to Committee Number 9 Minerals. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 169.
Senate File 169, sponsored by Senator Hicks.
First reading of the bill.
State Shooting Complex Task Force.
Senate File 169 is referred to Committee Number 9 Minerals. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 147.
Senate File 147, sponsored by Senator Anderson.
First reading of the bill.
Government Contracts, Labor Organization.
Senate File 147 is referred to Committee Number 10 Labor. Reports from standing committees.
Senate File 71, sponsored by Appropriations, State Loan and Bonds Program, an act relating to state public purpose investments. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred Senate File 71, State Loan and Bond Programs, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Henderson, Larson, Nicholas, Sherwood, Stith, Walters, Zwanitzer. Representative Nicholas, Chairman.
All right. We're at that order of business of bills on second reading. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 18.
Senate File 18, sponsored by Transportation, benefits for spouses of law enforcement members, an act relating to the administration of government.
Senate File 18, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 20.
Senate File 20, sponsored by Transportation, driver's license and ID card photo quality, an act relating to driver's license and identification cards.
Senate File 20, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 41.
Senate File 41, sponsored by Revenue, skill-based amusement games, authorized locations, an act relating to gaming.
We have amendments. Representative Larson Lloyd, I believe, on this bill, maybe? Senate File 41, this would be second reading amendment number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to move second read amendment number 1 to Senate File 41. In the definition we talked about during the our committee of the whole discussion, we seen that over on the other side they had changed this original language out to a facility that had fuel islands that could take any commercial truck and sell diesel. I thought that was that loosened and broadened up the ability for more of these facilities to have these kind of games. And I think that we were trying to put some sideboards on it. So if you consider what they had, anybody that had a 3/4 ton pickup that was a commercial pickup and used fuel could be considered. And if you could get fuel at that type of store, then they would be considered a truck stop. And so I went back to the original language that the committee had worked on during the interim, brought that language back up to 50,000. There's a valid conversation on how much fuel ought to be that they sell to qualify for a truck stop, but I brought it back to the original language of 50,000 gallons a month, and then also brought back in the language on the acreage that they encompass. So it has to be big enough that trucks are parking there and that sort of thing. So, Mr. Chairman, that's my amendment and would ask for your support.
Anybody like to speak on this amendment? Question having been called, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 41 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Second reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 41 has been adopted. Representative Davis.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to, oh my gosh, what do I like to do here? I'd like to move second reading amendment to House Bill 41.
Second reading amendment
So
number 2.
Senate File 41. And do you want me to read it, sir?
Just say second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 41.
Second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 41.
Thank you.
In this amendment, what I'd like to do is remove the 50,000 gallons of fuel and substitute in 125,000 gallons of fuel, because the targeted area are truck stops on our major interstates. And the reason is, if you take a look at 125,000 gallons of fuel, divide that by average 30 days, that's 4,166 gallons a day. Well, the average semi will pull in and fill up 150 gallons of fuel. So that's 27 semis a day. Okay, if you take the average pickup at 40 gallons per day, that's 104 pickups per day. Now in Wyoming, tend to be a very diesel-heavy pickup state. You know, everybody likes their power. But all I'm saying is, we're just, by lowering that bar down to 50, that's too broad. I think we need to bring that back in. And, you know, if you've pulled into any of these semi truck stops, you'll see that the 27 semis is nothing. So that's why I'd like to increase this, so we could be a little more specific on targeting the recreational dollars going up and down our interstates. And then the other thing is, what do we want our state to look like, you know, if every place is a truck stop? So I would look for a favorable vote on this amendment to House Bill, or Senate File 41. Thank you. I'd stand for questions.
Chairman Brown for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm just curious, we're looking at two amendments here, you know, and one is significantly more than the other. And so I guess what I'm just trying to find out is what the difference is and what we're going to see as far as the expansion of these gaming areas. Are we really at 125,000? How many truck stops are we talking about? What does this look like in the landscape of the state as opposed to the 50,000 that we just adopted without any discussion? I just kind of like, I mean, when we take it to 125,000, it seems like that's a pretty drastic increase. And I'd just like to know, you know, the communities that may have a few, I'm thinking of that little one out there by Muddy Gap. You know, their truck stop, I don't know if they would even hit the 50,000, but I surely would think that they don't hit the 125. So if I could just get some numbers, it would help me decide whether or not I want to go for this amendment. Thanks.
Representative Nyman for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To give you an idea, to answer that question, when I owned a fuel supply station in our small town of less than 400 people, 50,000 gallons was less than what I sold every month. So that would put these kind of facilities in even small towns off the beaten path. So yeah, I would support this amendment because it's going to keep it out of smaller communities. It's going to force it more to where you've got more of an actual truck stop, because when you've got a lumber community there and you've got a lot of trucks coming through hauling timber, you easily crank up over the top of that amount. So just to give you an idea. So that would put it in some pretty small communities.
Representative Larson for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the presenter of this good amendment and my even superior amendment was was in conversation, because I think we're trying to accomplish the same thing and with some guardrails. I think that the decision for the body really is where do we want, how do we want to see the growth of these skill games? Do we want to see it permeate throughout the state and have that available in the small communities that are around the state? So I actually had an amendment drafted. You'll see mine was a corrected version. I had it up to 200,000 a month. Then yesterday I called some of the fuel marketers that handle fuel throughout the state. I called those up in my county and some around, and I said, so what is 200,000 versus 50,000? They talked me off the ledge and brought me back to this 50,000. He says, because we'd like to participate and be able to have this available for revenue. I'm not a gaming guy, okay, and I get really concerned about this, but that's really what this discussion is about. And we've put some restrictions on the expansion of these, and we've said truck stops and these sorts of things. And I think what we're trying to do right now is further refine, polish up what our policy is going to be in defining what a truck stop is that is able to participate in that. So just so as you contemplate this, you know, I went in, again, I just reached out up in the middle part of the state where we long ways from any interstate, and they thought what I originally had was too much and liked the other. So just for your information.
Representative Yin for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and in favor of the amendment. So members, we had discussions about truck stops when we talked about skill-based gaming and many of our other debates in the previous years. when we started opening this door. What I would caution you is allowing too many places to allow skill-based games, because the second you allow them, receding from that will be very, very difficult. So if for some reason we're missing some truck stops that, we think makes sense that should have these skill-based games, we can come back another year, open that door a little wider and let them in. But I think opening it to 50,000, as the good majority floor leader said, opens it up to a lot of communities. So let's just be real careful with how we expand this and put it at an appropriate place now. And then if we come back, just like we do as a legislature every year, make things better and fix things that are broken, we can come back and widen the door a little more for other people. But it'll be harder to come back from that if we go too far now. So Ornan in favor. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? Representative Davis for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In reference to the good representative in the corner over there, at 50,000 gallons, there'd be about 42 trucks a day. That's, you think around Cheyenne, 42 diesel-fired pickups, powered pickups, I should say. That's not very much, so that's lowering the bar quite a bit. And to the good representative from that country up there, we're not disqualifying all these small communities. The expansion is still there at the 21 and older level. So we're not really prejudicing, whatever that word is. We're not really profiling the smaller communities. And then the biggest question I'd like to bring to you guys is, what do we, as the citizens of Wyoming, want to see the state looking like? And with that, I would hope for a favorable vote. Thank you.
All those in favor of second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 41 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Second reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 41 has been adopted. Senate File 41 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 59.
Senate File 59, sponsored by Travel, State Parks Account, Agency Expenditure Authority, an act relating to state lands.
Senate File 59 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 63.
Senate File 63, sponsored by Revenue, Tax Administration Revisions, an act relating to taxation and revenue.
Senate File 63 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 68.
Senate File 68, sponsored by Select Water, Prescriptive Easement for Water Conveyances, an act relating to prescriptive easements.
Senate File 68 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 176.
Senate File 176, sponsored by Senator Driscoll. Solid Waste Disposal Districts Consolidation, an act related to counties.
Senate File 176 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is Senate Joint Resolution 7.
Senate Joint Resolution 7, sponsored by Senator Driscoll, Support for Taiwan, a joint resolution in support of Taiwan.
Senate Joint Resolution 7 having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. We're at that order of business of bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the third reading consent list consisting of the following bills: Senate File Number 5, Senate File Number 6, Senate File Number 14, Senate File Number 15, Senate File 17, Senate File 28, Senate File 24, then Senate File 28, Senate File 33, Senate File 36, Senate File 57, Senate File 118, and Senate File 122.
Would anyone like any of the bills removed from the consent list? Representative Knapp.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Pursuant to Rule 7.3, I would ask that Senate File 24 be laid back one day.
Without objection, it is so ordered. Senate File 24 will be laid back one day. Will the reading clerk read the bills on the consent list?
Senate File 5, sponsored by corporations. Medical malpractice statutory update. An act relating to the insurance code being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 6, sponsored by corporations. Insurance rebating modernization. An act relating to the insurance code being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 14, sponsored by transportation. Wyoming National Guard professional malpractice liability. An act relating to Wyoming National Guard being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 15, sponsored by transportation. Military leave for state employees. An act relating to defense forces and affairs being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 17, sponsored by transportation. Off-road recreational vehicle safety and insurance. An act relating to motor vehicles being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 28, sponsored by Tribal. Livestock infectious disease control, tribal inclusion. An act relating to agriculture being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 33, sponsored by Judiciary. Defining aircraft for purposes of hunting prohibitions. An act relating to game and fish being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 36, sponsored by Capital Finance. Investment Funds Committee Selection Panel Amendments. An act relating to the investment of state funds being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 57, sponsored by Appropriations. State-held drainage district bonds. An act relating to public funds being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 118, sponsored by Appropriations. Fund balance calculations, federal encumbrances included. An act relating to the administration of government being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. Senate File 122, sponsored by Senator Driscoll. Non-resident workers, vehicle registration extension. An act relating to motor vehicles being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
So we're in third reading, so everybody find their seats, please. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the House? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Allemand, Allred, Andrew, Angelos, Banks, Bear, Berger, Brown, Burkhart, Byron, Chadwick, Chestick, Klauston, Conrad, Crago, Davis, Eklund, Haroldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Hornock, Jennings, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson JT, Lawley, Locke, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Nemec, Northrup, Oakley, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Pendergraft, Penn, Provenza, Rodriguez-Williams, Sherwood, Singh, Slagle, Smith, Stith, Storer, Strzok, Stivar, Tarver, Trujillo, Walters, Ward, Washut, Western, Winter, Wiley, Yin, Zwaniter Dan, Zwaniter Dave, Speaker Summers.
Aye.
Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye. As for Senate File 5, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Warnock? Aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 61 aye, 1 no. As for Senate File 6, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Warnock? Aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 61 aye, 1 no. As for Senate File 14, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye. As for Senate File 15, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye. As for Senate File 17, are there any changes? Warnock, aye to no. Penn, aye to no. Andrew, aye to no. Smith, aye to no. Slagle, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Haroldson, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Ward, aye to no. Strzok, aye to no. Knapp, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Rodriguez-Williams, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Singh, aye to no. Allemand, aye to no. Banks, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 45 aye, 17 no. As for Senate File 28, are there any changes? Ward, aye to no. Smith, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Heiner, aye to no. Ottman, aye to no. Locke, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 56 aye, 6 no. As for Senate File 33, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Western? Aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 61 aye, 1 no. As for Senate File 36, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye. As for Senate File 57, are there any changes? Allemand, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 61 aye, 1 no. As for Senate File 118, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye. As for Senate File 122, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 62 aye.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate Files 5, 6, 14, 15, 17, 28, 33, 36, 57, 118, and 122 have passed the House. Chairman Olson, do you have a privilege?
I do. Privilege of the floor, Mr. Speaker.
Please.
Okay, in the South Gallery, we have, these are some of the kids that we introduced earlier, and I apologize, the note I had said sixth graders, but they're actually fifth graders. We don't want to rush them through the system too far. And they're here with their teachers, Miss Horn, Miss Kessler, and Miss Kinsler. Welcome to the house.
All right, welcome to the house. We're at that order of business of bills on third reading and final passage, the regular list. The first bill for our consideration is Senate File 26.
Senate File 26, sponsored by Labor. Psychology Interjurisdictional Compact, an act relating to professional licensing, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 26. So in short, this is just to initiate a discussion for everyone in this particular case. As I think in most cases, we're all in favor of reciprocity. I don't think there's a lot of contention about that. We certainly care deeply about getting support for our underserved people across the state. There's no question, I think most of us, that's where we stand on that particular topic. We want people to have access to the services they want. And I'm very much a person, if a person wants to get support, get their services from a person across the state line, I absolutely agree with that. I want everyone to get the services that they want. But I want to dope this discussion more concerning the compact in terms of what do we, does the compact, where are the lines of the compact versus the lines of sovereignty of the state? And I know I may be mixing that a little bit, but I want to talk a little bit about that because as I read through these compacts, maybe I'm oversimplifying the problem, but when it comes to reciprocity, sure, a set of simple agreements, I know in this world may not be simple, but a set of simple agreements to allow reciprocity, allow our people to practice in another state, not without boundaries for that state, of course. And the same here. We don't want people coming and providing their services in this state without boundaries. But when you read through these compacts, there's a lot of information in here that go well beyond, it's definitely reciprocity with massive strings attached. Let me put it that way. So I just wanted to open up and throw out a few thoughts and basically open it for discussion to see what other people think. So ask a few questions. So for example, I look at page, let's see here, I just look at page 43. Now I know that in this document there are some sideboards that say, hey, the Wyoming State Board is the dominant structure here. I do understand that, but you also, when you start throwing out that we have this commission that's going to, and on page 43, for example, they're going to promulgate the rules. I assume they've promulgated those rules. Have we reviewed those rules? Do we know where and if those rules really truly infringe on things that we're uncomfortable with? So that's really just an example of an area in the document. I'm throwing that out there for discussion because that's where, when you're trying to read these documents, as you all know, we're all trying to read this. We're trying to make informed decisions on something like this. And you read that and you think, well, what do we know? But maybe more important is what don't we know? What haven't we researched? Even reading this document, I can tell you I read it through a couple times. I probably don't understand it at the depth I need to. Another example in here is page 49. I'm just going to use that as another example. The commission may levy on and collect an annual assessment from each compact state. I try to look at this from a little bit more of a simplified perspective. We're trying to create an environment where our service providers can cross lines in a healthy, safe way, and we can allow that same service back. Again, we, Wyoming, maybe it's even more important for us to allow people to come help us when we're underserved in many areas, probably this one specifically. But, the commission may level and collection an annual assessment. Do we know what that looks like? Is that something that's been well discussed and thought out? And do we even know what that even looks like as a legislator when we vote on this bill? Another one that always jumps out is page 57, where it basically talks about the commission, upon determination that an emergency exists, the commission may consider and adopt an emergency rule without prior notification. Here again, sounds innocent. Maybe they declare it emergency, maybe we don't declare it emergency. And as most of you who've looked at this document know, we as a state that joins this compact, we're to a large degree obligated to support that. Now, I understand there are mechanisms for us to get out of it, but those are some of the examples. And then there's just this statement in there, and I understand because we're going through this document and putting this in statute, there's a statement on page 58 that just says the executive, legislative, judicial branches of state government in each compact state shall enforce this compact. I guess sort of by definition, us voting yes on this, that would be a given. But here again, we have this commission saying you will do this. That's just something that raises red flags to me. That's why I wanted to open the conversation. And that's kind of where I stand on this. So,
Representative Locke, is this a delete the enacting clause amendment? And usually, Representative Locke, when you do that, you say this is delete the enacting clause and I will withdraw it at the appropriate time. So I would assume that that's your intent with this amendment. Is that correct?
that is correct. And thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
Yes, that is correct. And yes, this is a delete the enactment clause.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Chairman Zwanitzer, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think I heard three concerns. Let me quickly hit them. First, on the rules. Rules are public. Any one of you can go look at the SciPact website. 35 states are already members, 8 more this year have what we're doing, statutes in the works. So yeah, all of the rules are out there. You can read through the compact and the administrative, what the National Association has done. And hopefully by the end of the year, I think we'll be over 40 states. The second was on the burden through that the compact places on states. So yes, there's a fee because there's an administrative burden to run a compact. They do divide it by the number of practitioners, not by state. So I would submit to you, Wyoming will probably have the least burden or one of the least burdens financially of paying into the compact for the national group to ensure that our credentials are at par with the field. So I'm not necessarily worried about that. And then emergency rules, we do that all the time in Wyoming. If you look in the bill, it says emergency rules can be placed, but then within 90 days, they have to go out and for comment and review among all of the states. So, perhaps for 90 days, don't want to think Armageddon would happen, but there is some provisions. That's nothing we do differently than Wyoming when we do emergency rules yearly across the board for agencies. And then we come back and review them and make sure they're adequate and in place. So I think those were the three concerns I heard. None of them I think are serious concerns for the bill. We could always get more educated if we had the time on what all the compact rules are in any of our 34 compacts. But I believe they're above board. When I read, through the basics of the national organization, how they distribute these fees among the practitioners in each state, and this emergency rulemaking, it hasn't happened yet, but this compact's only been in place for about 3 years. So they haven't had to do any of those situations, but I would submit to you that's nothing out of the ordinary or scary, and it's the same language I believe we allow in almost all of our compacts across the board in Wyoming.
Representative Ottman, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the amendment, and basically because as being a member of the committee that meets on health. The last couple years, we saw a lot of compacts, and we have a friend across the hallway that is what we consider an expert in compacts, and we've put a lot of them in. As was just said, there's like 34 of them, and some of them are for different branches of medicine, and it was, in my mind, it was to enable us to have professionals come in and be able maybe to come here for a month, or once a month, or twice a month, and provide services that didn't necessitate them to have brick and mortar offices. And so when you look at eye doctors, and you look at some medical doctors or surgeons or orthopedic, you come to appreciate the certain physical things. But I would just stick out a note of caution with this. As we are in a day of mental crisis, and everybody's heard about it, and that's all we talk about, and that's where we're putting all our money, or a lot of it, I will say. This is people's minds and things. And so to bring other people in and to help in our communities, we might see that as maybe beneficial. These compacts cannot be changed. Once we agree to things, there's no amending or changing or doing anything, because that would just be ridiculous. I mean, you just can't do that with 34 different states. So the compacts are enforced once they are signed, and they are what they say. The thing that I'm concerned about is, what if we here decide that there's other states that do things? Okay, so when they cross the line over here, they're not permitted to do anything against what we allow. So that's granted, and that's good. But what about if we have providers that don't like the laws that we have here, and they want to take our people, our citizens, across the lines? Are we quite ready and understand what that means? How obligated will we be to do follow-up care? How obligated will we be? Is this something that we need to look at before we sign on to this? And I would just ask you to think about that. With a word of caution, we do not have to rush into this until we do something. Maybe this should be an interim topic. So please vote no, or please vote aye on the amendment, and no on the bill. Thank you.
Representative Stivar for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the amendment against the bill, we've got to take this very cautiously. There's 34 compacts out there right now that's in statutes. We want to go change something in one of them compacts. We can't do it because of the compact. All the other states got to agree to it. So vote no.
Representative Larson for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And having been in this body for a while, and having dealt with these issues on labor and health, and a lot of these compacts deal with nurses and emergency medical services, where commissions are set up, we do have the ability to change the structure of the compact, the emphasis that the compact puts on. That's why the commission's established. That's why each state has representation in the commission, is so that they're fluid and they have the ability to change. When it talks about that the state shall enforce, meaning the legislative judicial branch shall enforce the compact, meaning that those people who are licensed in the state then will be licensed according to the conditions of the compact. Living assessment, we talked about earlier when we presented the budget bill. We had an assessment for an education compact that the state belongs to. We have a variety of these compacts that we have to pay state dues into, that the commission, that allows the commission to function. Emergency rules was a point that I thought was important and worthy for discussion. As something new approaches, and I recall a few years ago when we had a number of forest fires in the West, there was a real need for emergency medical services and EMTs. And the compact drafted emergency rules to allow the EMT personnel to come into various states because there is such a need for them. And so those emergency rules try to respond to the needs that are present at the time. We've seen that also in our nursing compact. I think more importantly is this is a very a profession that that says this is important to us. And as we look at mental health needs, and being able to draw on resources from our neighboring states, and our neighboring states being able to draw on our resources, it provides greater opportunity to address the mental health challenges that we currently have. And I think that this is based on their recommendation as professions, not as professionals. And I really think that if there was a concern by those people practicing in this profession within our state, that we would hear from them that this is something that they would encourage us not to adopt. Whereas we've heard just the opposite. They're encouraging us, they're asking us to be part of this compact to allow a greater access to mental health resources. So I'd encourage you to support the bill and support the compact. I think it goes a long way in addressing our mental health needs.
Representative Bear for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This really boils down to one thing for me, and that is state sovereignty. When we enter these pacts, we will be giving up our sovereignty. And yes, we do pay the least amount in dues, but we also have the least voting power. So when it comes to the direction of these pacts, I think it is dangerous for us to put ourselves into these pacts without having some sideboards on that protect us and our way of living here in the state of Wyoming. And the professionals in this particular area of expertise are being challenged today in several bills that this legislature from both ends of the building have brought. And we brought those pieces of legislature because of the people of Wyoming have concerns about protecting a certain group of people, our citizens, from changes that this particular expertise is very supportive of going after and changing the way those people live. And there's concerns about their future and the mental illness that will be brought on them based on the changes that are being recommended by this group of experts. So these experts want to join this pack. And I will tell you that the states that are in the pack already are much more aligned with what the experts would like versus the people of Wyoming. So in this particular case, I will tell you that your constituents, I believe wholeheartedly, your constituents are speaking out that we need to push back on this way of thinking. And this pack makes it even more difficult to do so. So I am on and for the amendment and opposed to the bill. Thank you.
Representative Davis for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, I'm just a little confused in how this process is working. Okay, we've got this bill up before us right now. Now, when we promulgate the rules, is it because of the action of the bill, or do the rules come before the bill? Is my question, because the bill is spelling it out. How are the rules there to give us the implementation of if we join this pack? And then the second part of my question is, who's the final signee of the pack? Is it the executive branch, or who's the final, where's the buck stop with? Okay. Thank you.
Representative Clouston for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll just bring up a couple of points here. Now, remember, joining these compacts does not change our state regulations or practice act. But when you do join a compact, you have a seat at the table. So as the rules are made, Wyoming will have a vote. If you're not a member of the compact, you don't get to vote as these rules are made or changed. And then there's a patient safety issue. So if you're a member of a compact and there's we'll say here, a psychiatrist who's a bad actor in one state, that gets reported to every single person in the every state that's involved in the compact. If you're not involved in compact, then you're depending on that bad actor reporting themselves that they've had a disciplinary action in another state. So just some other points in here that haven't been brought up that are benefits of being part of a compact. Thank you.
Chairman Brown for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the only thing that I continuously have heard about this, and I've been here 7 years now, and in those 7 years, I think I've been privileged to cast an aye vote for probably at least 8 to 10 of these compacts. And it's because I recognize the benefit of what it brings to our state. But every single time when we come back to this discussion, I want to remind everybody that these are voluntary. There is nothing forcing any of the providers that are in this state or who want to come practice in this state from coming and getting a license and practicing underneath the authority of the state. This is just allowing them that if they belong to a state and there is a compact and they want to join and we have this compact, they can come here. They're still underneath the jurisdiction of the rules and the promulgation of the rules that are being talked about. But to be honest with you, I actually had one on teachers that has been being worked through the process through the interim this past year. And I sat on a subcommittee with one of those groups that we belong to. And I was prepared to bring a teacher compact, but one of the things that concerned me was being one of the first states in. And the reason is this was the first year that that compact was available. And this is not the first year that this compact is available. This is something that 34 other states have looked at. They've adopted the opportunity to, and they see the benefit that it's benefiting their state as well. And so I think that it's really important for us to just take a deep breath and realize that if we adopt this, no, we're not giving away state sovereignty. We're not. Because we still have jurisdiction over those practicing in our state. That's plain and simple. Now, I understand that there's concerns about what this does look like if somebody does come practice here and they're a bad actor in another state, but I think the good representative from the center part of the state or the northern part of the state just mentioned this, that kind of stuff is actually really good about this bill because then it gets reported to us. And we can be ahead of that curve as opposed to waiting and getting a background check and telling them, no, you can't do this. You can't practice here. So, it's a completely voluntary act if somebody wants to join into this and wants to practice underneath these acts. And I think that's the biggest misconception that we're missing right now. And I'm proud to have adopted a lot of these and cast my aye vote on these because I see the value that it truly brings to the state of Wyoming with just under 600,000 residents. We don't even equal to, some of these smaller towns in some of these larger states. We can't get those people here to practice the way that we need to. And so this is an opportunity for us to take care of our citizens the way that we should. So on and against. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Ward for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On page 21, it says that a license restricted in any compact state applies to all compact states. So if a psychologist, for example, participated in this compact and didn't agree with some of the philosophical assertions of the organization behind this compact and refused to give that kind of care, they could potentially have their license restricted in all the compact states, and I think that's concerning.
Representative Penn for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I sat in committee and listened to some of the testimony on these compacts, they talked about, can we change this, can we not? We can't change the compact without the vote and input of all the rest of the states on that particular issue. That's why we have a 75 some odd page bill that's already made it through the Senate with 0 amendments. We can't change it ourselves. I look at it a little bit like our Constitution in that our state constitution says this, municipalities and cities can be more restrictive than the Constitution, but they can't be less restrictive. And that's similar to how these compacts work. We can look at this compact and say, okay, we're going to go further than what this compact requires, and we can do that. And any licensee that wants to come to our state would have to comply with that. But we can't look at this compact and say, I don't like that portion there. Say it's the requirements of the education required for gender. Say we don't like that, we're not going to have that. We can't do those types of things. And so there are very strict restrictions on the things that would be able to be changed. With regards to the comment that was raised, or the concern that was raised with the emergency, the section or clause on emergency rules, our current federal executive administration has entertained, or I've heard that they have been entertaining, instituting an emergency or a public health emergency on abortion. And so if there was such an emergency taken or instituted, how would that affect these compacts, given the fact that we're dealing with mental health, and that's something that is very closely tied? Would our providers be able to opt out of forced counseling for abortions? We wouldn't probably be able to answer that question. Concerns that have been raised to me by constituents is, what about these licensees who are coming from out of state, or who are out of state and are counseling via telehealth or telepsychology, and they may be coming from a state which has a lot more, or has ideas that are maybe not aligned with what we value in Wyoming. And how are they going to be counseling our citizens with regards to those specific issues? Maybe those aren't values that we want to be having here. With regards to the comment on the support is settled in favor of this bill, I would push back on that a little bit. For those who keep up on their emails, we did have some emails in opposition to this from these particular individuals involved with this compact, and there is something of a rift present there. And so on the amendment against the bill.
Representative Andrew for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and in support of the amendment. Recognition and reciprocity of licensing and breaking down barriers for our practitioners to work is a good thing, but this is not the bill. This bill requires the state to create 2 additional licenses that we don't already have. One of them's on page 15, line 17. A reciprocity bill should not create additional licensing requirements for practitioners. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Pendergraft for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Couple of questions for whoever may have the answers. Page 57 of this, paragraph L, upon determination that an emergency exists. My question is, who determines what an emergency is? I'm a little bit leery of that. I'm very much in favor of the reciprocity aspect of this, especially where we have, for example, old soldiers living in various corners of the state where it's difficult to get out and see somebody. But I understand, and perhaps somebody else could fill me in a little bit better, I understand that we do have telehealth services available at this point, so I'm not sure how much this enhances that. Anyway, I need a little bit of help understanding those 2 issues before I can feel comfortable with this. Thank you.
Representative Provenza for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I heard a lot from folks back at home that don't have access to care. I heard from providers that asked for help in making sure that people had access to care. We have folks around this state who are struggling to find help. I think that's clear and apparent in our suicide rate. Our mental health crisis is, we keep hearing, well, this isn't the perfect solution. This isn't what we need to be doing. This has too much regulation. And all I can think is the people back at home are suffering. They are dying by their own hands, and our providers are struggling to keep up. In fact, they're not keeping up. I think that's clear. They're doing the best they can. And we keep talking about what's perfect, and perfect gets in the way of doing anything. What's the worst that can happen? A little overregulation or more people in your district dying? Please vote no against the amendment and aye for the bill out of perspective.
Chairman Washit for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a quick question. On page 59, line 6, it states that the courts shall take judicial notice of the rules. And I'm just wondering, do we do that anywhere else in statute where we direct the judicial branch that they must, with a shall, take judicial notice of something? Thank you.
Representative Jennings for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, members, I've been here for, I think this is the 9th year, and I started out the same as many of you. I looked at the reciprocity aspect of this, and the 2 speakers ago, I very much looked at that and thought, this is a good solution. It brings about some reciprocity. And if it were just the reciprocity, I would not hesitate to vote for it, I think. But our founders were, let's call this compact a treaty. And our founders were very resonant. In fact, in one of those very first guys that worked at the executive gave a farewell address, and he says, be very cautious about signing treaties because they don't have the same interests that we do. Now, he was talking about around the world, and I've thought a lot about that. Today, there's things that many people that would have a treaty with us do not necessarily have the same interest that Wyoming has. And so I'm then taken back to something else that we commonly all would know from the federal level. Well, we have to pass this, and then we'll find out what's in it. And I'd ask the body, I've not read the compact all the way. It's quite a few pages. I have read quite a bit of it. And in that length of time, I found half a dozen things that really make me wonder, is this Wyoming values? Are these the things that we want to promote? It was said by one of the earlier speakers, we have 34 compacts. And I will tell you that I've tried to read a number of those. So if you haven't read it, how do you know if you're doing right by your constituency? And I would argue that there's probably very few of us that have read this from start to finish. And so I think it's very good that the amendment was brought, that we can have this discussion. There's things in here that are very concerning, just like there would be if we went back and read all 34 of those others. Is it the end of the world if we pass this? Probably not. I think Armageddon was mentioned early on, and it's probably not. But I'd urge the body to think about that we're entering basically a treaty. We're giving up some of our values and some of our core values, and we're trying to attempt to justify that by saying reciprocity. And I totally agree with reciprocity. I think that is what we should be focusing on. And I would want our department that takes care of this type of issue to talk with those people, those states that we would like to enter into an agreement of reciprocity. But the other 65 pages in that treaty, what are unintended consequences that that our constituency might not appreciate? The reciprocity, I think most people would appreciate that. I think that'd be an easy thing. In fact, I think it would sail right through. But I would urge the body, if you haven't read it, if you haven't had at least thumbed through it and had a fairly good grasp of what issues might be lying there, I'd urge caution in favor of the amendment, against the bill.
Representative Hornock for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to briefly go through the current licensing requirements in statute for this psychology service. So 3327-117 says the board shall issue a license as a psychologist to any applicant who files an application upon the forms and in a manner prescribed by the board, and then meets, pays the fee, and then meets the satisfactory conditions of a certain thing. The board may issue a provisional license to applicants, and the board, somebody can practice inside Wyoming for 30 days without necessarily going through that licensing practice. So just something that we can think about as we look at this. I think that the licensing, the ability to get licensed in Wyoming, if you're at that level of care as a psychologist, I don't think it's very difficult to actually get licensed here in Wyoming. I don't know that the compact will necessarily take care of the issues that we have here in Wyoming. Thanks.
Representative Heiner for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A couple of days ago, I stood at this pulpit and I talked about reciprocity and my daughter and how this could help her and in her career as she takes vacations, temporary telemedicine, and all the advantages of that in our society and technology to be able to connect with clients. I have to tell the members that I had not read the entire bill at that point. I read the title, I heard some testimony outside in the hall, and I thought this was a great deal. Since then, I've read the bill, and I have pause. There's some things in here that make me very uncomfortable. And so I would urge this body, before you vote yes, read the bill. Don't approve this until you have read the bill. And you may have read the bill and still think this is a great idea, but I just encourage everyone to read it before you approve this. This is one of those things you want to be sure of what you're voting for. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? Representative Larson for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there's a couple of questions were asked that once you're in, and there's no way out. And it's important to note that the only way you're in the compact is by doing what we're doing. We have to adopt legislation that allows us to be in. Then on page 64, it says any compact state may withdraw from this compact by enacting a statute repealing the same. So if we don't like one out, we just pass law and we're out. There's concern about sovereignty, and it says on page 65, if this compact shall be held contrary to any of the constitution of any state member thereto, the compact shall remain in full force and effect to the remaining. So if there's something that impacts our constitution, we can remain in the compact and comply with our constitution, and what is in conflict of our constitution is severed and can remain in effect for the remaining states. So I think it allows for our sovereignty. It talks about on that same page that this compact can be amended by the compact states. And this is important, is that no amendment to this compact shall become effective and binding upon any compact state until it's enacted into law by all of the compact states. So even though we may have the least representation, if we don't like an amendment to the compact, it's not going to be adopted until we adopt it into this compact. It'll have to come back and be, and we see this in the nurses compact. We have those updates periodically where we have to update our statutes for that compact as well as the EMS compact. I think that we're safe there. I think some of those concerns that I've heard, at least in my mind, are okay. The good chairman of judiciary brought out the point about the court shall take judicial notice. And as I read that, I think what they're saying is that anything that pertaining to the subject matters which affect the powers and responsibilities of the commission, because the commission's adopted that cross-state, that then the courts in respective states will take notice of those things that impact the powers and responsibilities of the commission. There's some concern expressed that if a psychologist or a practitioner violates a component or something in another state, that then they would lose their license in this state. The reference is on page 21, and it's talking about psychologist license to participate in interjurisdictional telepsychology. And what it says there is if that you violate any other state or your own state's rules or that govern license where you're practicing telepsychology, that your e-passport or your ability to participate in telepsychology will be revoked, not your license, and that you would not be able to practice telepsychology in the compact state agreement, not in that it doesn't say anything in there that I can see that it impacts the license, your licensure in your home state. So again, I hope that some of those concerns I've heard, I think as I read the bill, I think they address this and I think that it's I think that it's something that again provides an opportunity to greater address some issues on mental health, and would encourage an aye vote.
Anybody else for their second time before the sponsor? Sponsor, Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry. So just really quick, I heard one comment that said the service providers are, and of course the consumers are looking for this kind of support and this kind of help. I have absolutely no question that that's true. In fact, but please, I think we would all agree that they want this and we believe we need this, and we all do this because we're looking at the reciprocity component. And it is safe to say that these compacts go far beyond reciprocity. And again, we all want the reciprocity, but I'm for that. What I'm against is a compact where we give power to this unelected commission. I just don't believe that's the way for us to go. There's obviously many opinions in here. There's obviously people more experienced than me, but here's what I can tell you. When we do give power over to this commission, we always say, yeah, we have the right to, hey, we can get out of this anytime we want. Well, we don't meet all year round, okay? And the truth is, when we've seen this many, many times, once you get in these things, it's often much easier to comply, right, than to put a whole lot of energy into pushing back. That's just human nature. Everybody does it. It's that reason I say, let's be cautious moving into these types of agreements. So I am I'm actually against the bill, and I guess at this point I will withdraw the amendment.
Thank you, Representative, for withdrawing third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 26. Senate File 26, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Ellerman? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Clauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Hornock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom? Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez-Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storer? Strzok? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin. Zwonitzer Dan. Zwonitzer Dave. Speaker Summers.
Aye.
Are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 36 aye, 26 no.
Senate File 26, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate File 26 has passed the House. The next bill for our consideration is Senate File 42.
Senate File 42, sponsored by Revenue, Taxation of Cigars, an act relating to tobacco taxes being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
Representative Locke, I believe you have the third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 42. Third reading amendment number 1 is to delete the enacting clause, so I'll leave that one for last. Representative Locke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 1 for, number 2, sorry, for Senate File 42.
Mr. Speaker, point of order.
What's your point?
I'd like to call a Rules Committee for the germaneness of this amendment to the bill.
Rules Committee to the front. So after the Rules Committee has met in a close, kind of a close vote of the Rules Committee, the Rules Committee agrees that this, that it believes that this amendment, third reading amendment number 2, is within the scope of the bill. And therefore, that will be my ruling as well. So Representative Locke, please continue on with your explanation of the bill, of the explanation of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So the intent of the bill, as controversial as it feels, was actually to do a little bit of simplification and cleanup, and really not significantly change what we were attempting to do with this. I think going back to the original bill, the intent was to, we have these brick and mortar, I think the chairman had mentioned this, we've got these brick and mortar folks that they get, they have some significant taxes that get levied on them, makes it very hard for them to actually function in this state. So anyway, what my goal with this was to, in doing this, so the other tobacco products, it is my understanding, basically they cover cigars, pipe tobacco, and dry snuff. Now, dry snuff is not really marketed in any significant way in this state, and for the most part, cigars make up nearly all of that category, that other tobacco category. And you'll actually, I realize I may not be able to do this, but you'll actually see this on one of the forms that is provided by the Department of Revenue, where this OTB, this other tobacco products, is on there, and you'll see that these other products are separate from this other tobacco product category where cigars reside. Anyway, so this amendment, the way it's written, changes the on page 2, I believe it is, it changes that 20% to 10%, and then it removes kind of the other cap language that's throughout the bill. And under it also, the way it's written, the objective, because we keep it in the, because we change the percentage at that point, what it doesn't do, it doesn't cause the change that the Department of Revenue was going to have to make to get that appropriation. So they were going to have to make changes to the form for that appropriation, so it removes that. Now, let me give you a little summary of that. So this other tobacco category covers out of the group of them that's mentioned, and you'll see this in the fiscal note. You'll see this $7.1 million of revenue that's out there, okay? This group, this other tobacco category, got lumped in with other things such as vaping, the chewing tobacco, those kinds of things were lumped in there. Out of that 7.8 or 0.1 million, only 800,000 of that from a revenue perspective was gathered by this other tobacco products category. So the cigars, pipe tobacco, and dry snuff make up that $800,000. So I'm looking to change the percentage, simplify our ability to the Department of Revenue's ability to administer this, and not have to spend money to change the form. And my thinking was this, so I'll just give you guys the logic I was applying in the process. Because I know there was a lot of discussion, it was inconsistent, there was a lot of, in the previous debate we had, there was a lot of discussion on the fact that we were inconsistently applying this percentage because we did it in that cap bullet. In this case, the reason I came to this point, because we're looking at roughly $277,000 that the Department of Revenue was looking to have to make a change. Taking this approach, if we look at that 800,000, and I'm just throwing some numbers out, let's just say the 10%, we drop it from 20 to 10, we're looking at roughly 400,000 of that. We're getting very close to, we simplified the bill, in my opinion, we simplified the bill a little bit, hopefully cleaned it up a little bit, not have to do that appropriation to make a change, by the Department of Revenue. And so anyway, I think it brings a few things together. So that's why I'm proposing this change. Sorry, it took me a while to explain that, but that's where I was going with the amendment, not really to significantly change what we were trying to do, but maybe provide a little bit of cleanup and a simplified administrative approach to this, where that category continues to be administered the way it has been administered in the past.
Representative Yin for your first time.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I have some concerns over part of this, so I'm gonna, what I would like to do, Mr. Speaker, is actually move to divide the amendment, with Division 1 being 17 and 18, and then Division 2 being everything else in the amendment.
So Representative Yin, so starting on line what?
Division 1 is lines 17 and 18 on the amendment.
And Division 2 is the rest?
Correct. That's correct, Mr. Speaker.
I rule that to be divisible.
Mr.
Which one
Speaker,
would you like to continue on?
I would like to start with Division 1.
Okay, Division 1, Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So on Division 1, if we adopt the amendment as a whole, I think that's interesting. But I think Division 1, where we cut all of these tobacco products across the board by 10%, is a bit too much. And so I would like for us to keep it where it is across the board for 20%. So I would ask you to defeat Division 1.
Representative Bear for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for Division 1, just so those of you who were not part of the Revenue Committee meeting where we discussed this and where we made the change in our amendment, I'm not sure how that's disappeared at this point, and it's necessary for this to be put back in. If you look on page 3, you'll see where it has this 10% already in law. And this change of 10% here is on page 2. The difference is the difference between online purchases and purchases at a brick and mortar store. So in other words, we're punishing the brick and mortar stores here in the state of Wyoming by having a 20% sin tax, whereas if someone was to go and purchase it online, they would only pay a 10% tax. So this is about fairness on a sin tax. On and for the division of the amendment.
Representative Swanitzer Dan for your first time.
Thank you. Against the division, because on this fairness issue, right, it's also, the taxation is fair based on lots of work we've done for the last decade on cigarettes and snuff, right? And so this tax rate is, you have to realize we tax snuff in a different way than we tax cigarettes, than we tax OTP and cigars. And so trying to keep the way that we tax each of these products, some by weight, some by volume, some by quantity, that I think the section's only 4 or 5 years old, I've been here too long, but that was the rate that it was equal to, I believe, cigarettes and snuff when we went from weight to volume, was that 20% number was in line with those other nicotine products across the board. So yes, it's probably unfair via online versus your brick and mortar, but it is fair, at least it certainly was, and I haven't seen any numbers to say it's not now, across your nicotine spectrum of other products that they have to pay when coming into the state.
Chairman Harshman for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, and again, I just caution, we have a pretty good bill right now, I think, that is maybe going to pass muster in both houses. And we're trying to solve a very specific problem on a very expensive product that is sold in about a dozen places in our state, and they are facing basically unfair taxation because of our laws with online sellers. That's one problem. The other problem is the remittance of the tobacco tax is when that product hits the store shelf. So this bill tries to take this and that's an expensive, it's currently 20%, and they have to remit that immediately. So we're trying to hold that off until this cigar is actually sold. So we're trying to solve a problem for about 12 brick and mortar stores in Wyoming. This amendment takes on a whole nother thing now. Okay, so it lowers the tax by about $400,000. That's fine. That's a rounding error probably in our state budget, but that's going to go on and on and on. And then on the flip side of this, compared to the one-time appropriation to redo a computer program in the Department of Revenue. So I'd urge caution on all these amendments. I think we got a pretty nice bill. I think it'll pass conference committee, and I think we can go to work on this and solve the real problem that we're trying to solve. So I'm going to vote no on all these amendments, and I urge you to as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Anybody else for their first time on Division 1? Representative Stith, are you lurking or are you gonna? Okay. Anybody else? Representative Hornock, do you want to speak to Division, or I mean, not Hornock, but Locke, do you want to speak to Division 1? All right. So all those for their second time, anybody for their second time on Division 1? Representative Yin, are you? Okay, Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to make sure it's clear for everyone, this division is only affecting all the other tobacco products that aren't premium cigars. So it affects cigars, snuff, and other tobacco products. It doesn't touch the premium cigar portion in the House Standing Committee amendment. That is affected in Division 2. So please vote no.
All right, all those in favor of Division 1 on third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 42 signify by saying aye. All those opposed? No. Division 1 to third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 42 has failed. Division being called on the division. All those in favor of Division 1, please stand. Count again. Stand still. Please. $26. All those opposed, please stand. Thank you. Division 1 on third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 42 has failed, 26 to 35. You know, it's kind of like when you count cows and you got two guys at the gate counting the cows, you got two different versions of how many cows you got. So that can happen up here at times. So with that, we're on Division 2, Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I think I'm actually in favor of Division 2. It still fixes the remittance problem, but it makes it apply equitably to all types of cigars, snuff, and other tobacco products, rather than dividing out premium cigars versus regular cigars. So I'm on and in favor of Division 2. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Locke for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm against Division 2. I believe that the original bill at least provided the appropriate support to the people we're trying to get support to, and I don't believe that the rest of the amendment or the Division 2 amendment actually helps with supporting those folks. So I'm actually against amendment or Division 2.
Representative Stith for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, on and against Division 2, it applies to a cigar, snuff, and other tobacco products. Tobacco products are defined to include cigarettes. For example, 14-3-301 defines tobacco products to mean any substance containing tobacco leaf or any product made or derived from tobacco. There's a separate definition of, similar definition of tobacco products in 9-4-1204, defining tobacco products as meaning any product that contains tobacco and is intended for human consumption. So there's this amendment, if adopted, would have the effect of whatever the amendment does, wouldn't just affect cigar and snuff and pipe tobacco. It would affect our whole tax regime for cigarettes as well. Cigarettes right now are taxed more heavily than the 20% rate. On and against.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor of the division? Representative Yin? Question being called. All those in favor of Division 2 signify by saying aye. All those opposed? No. Division 2 on third reading amendment number 2 to Senate File 42 has failed. Let's see, Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move third reading amendment number 3 to Senate File number 42 and ask for your favorable consideration of this amendment. Folks, what this amendment does is has a piece that is the same as the previous Division number 1 of the previous amendment, but it also takes into account something that the other chamber did with this bill. That was wiped out in our Revenue Committee. So that's why when you look at the bill as it sits right now, you would need to look at the introduced copy to apply these amendments. In this particular case, what I want to point out is we're applying a sin tax here. This is not talking about our regular sales tax. That's applied to all these products equally. This is the sin tax. So we're thinking about the fact that a tobacco product is being used, and there are all kinds of issues that come from using tobacco products. So when we tax cigarettes today, we tax them at a particular dollar amount, and it's 60 cents per pack. So that equates to 3 cents per cigarette. When we look at premium cigars, which is now the way we're dividing this up, they are taxed on a percentage. And the body just chose to make it 20% when it's in a brick and mortar and 10% if you're buying them online. There is no cap on that. So when you get into these premium cigars, we're making the tax, the sin tax, much greater for the amount of tobacco that's being ingested. So for instance, if we had a 50-cent cap, which this amendment proposes, one cigar would be equal to 17 cigarettes as far as the amount of tobacco that we're taxing for sin. If we don't, then the average cigar is going to be about 60 cigarettes. So if you think about the amount of tobacco being ingested, the sin tax, we're trying to make it fair here by putting a cap on it so that it's equal from one tobacco product to another. Again, cigarettes are taxed on a dollar amount, and these products are taxed on a percentage. So that's what we're trying to correct here. Again, that 10% on the online purchases would still be used up to the cap of 50 cents, and the 20% for your brick and mortar stores here in the state of Wyoming would go up to the 50-cent mark and then would stop. Would be no greater than that. And with that, I ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you.
Representative Byron for your first time.
Thank you, Speaker. On and against, folks, this was discussed in the Revenue Committee meeting and defeated. We have to think about this in the larger scale. Some of these cigars do cost well into the teens, 20s, $30. So if we think we're going to tax a cigar 50 cents, a $30 cigar, the same as we're going to tax a $7 cigar, it's not equitable. So I stand on and against this, and I think that if we do stick and defeat this amendment, stick to the 10%, it makes it fair across the board, just like any other products. The more expensive product we get, that doesn't mean we should put a flat tax. And as I have learned as a newer legislator, it is very, very dangerous to put a flat tax in the Green Book, and so I stand on and against.
Representative Hornock for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to divide the amendment. And my division would be lines 3 through 6, and then the rest of it. Lines 3 through 6 would be Division 1.
I'm going to need the bill. I'm going to need the bill, and I'm going to need Chairman Swanitzer because he's better at this than I am. I rule it is divisible.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative
So
Hornock, please continue. Which one would you like as Division 1?
I'd like
I missed
to
that.
do Division 1, take Division 1 first, lines 3 through 5, or through 6, excuse me, of Amendment number 3 to House Bill 42.
And then the rest is Division 2. All right,
Correct.
Division 1, Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we just talked about this division number 1 in our last amendment. I'm just pulling it out so we can talk about the rest of it. We defeated this amendment just a minute ago, so I want to see if the body's still favorable to defeat this so that we can either strike this or keep it in, or talk about the other substance in this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Bear for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for this division, and I think this is just a matter of saving time. Again, I'll reiterate that the reduction to 10% is trying to help our brick and mortar cigar stores here in the state of Wyoming. On and for the division.
All those sensing a need to vote, all those in favor of Division 1 to third reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 42, signify by saying aye. All those opposed? Division 1 has failed. Representative Hornock on Division 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move Division 2 to third reading.
You don't have to move it, you just have to speak to it.
Thank you. So this actually kind of takes out what was defeated earlier and helps us talk about that flat tax portion of this amendment.
Representative Bear for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So it was mentioned that, a higher purchase price should reflect in the tax that we collect. Folks, we do that in our sales and use tax on these products. So we're already taxing sales and use by a percentage, and it's fair across the board. Everybody pays the same percentage. And you pay that based on your county's sales and use tax. But the sin tax is a different animal, and that's why I mentioned that we're trying to make this apples to apples. You smoke one cigar, you get a certain amount of tobacco in your body. You smoke cigarettes, you get a certain amount of tobacco in your body, and we're trying to make them fairly equal. We can't really make it perfect. And the other side of this building came up with a 30-cent cap, and I'm moving that up to a 50-cent cap to make it more amenable to this body. So again, I ask for your favorable consideration of Division Number 2 on and for the division.
Chairman Harshman, for your first time on Division 2.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, again, I urge caution. I think we're trying to solve a little problem for these folks in this other tobacco products category, which you just learned on a previous amendment, that was cigars, dry snuff, pipe tobacco, and roll your own. And those are all on a percentage, okay? And that's not going to change for those. And now we're going to do further work in this category and put a fixed amount on. I really, again, I appreciate the debate. We had this same debate over the interim, and we had this same debate in our revenue committee. And but I think trying to solve a little problem, and I just don't want to endanger this bill. And I think I think the bill is in really pretty good shape. So I urge your no vote on this Division 2, and then, of course, your aye vote on the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time? Representative Bear for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, we're talking about the sin tax, not the sales tax. And here we have an opportunity to fix something that the very people who have asked for the first fix, which is in the bill on page 3, we're trying to make it so they don't have to pay their taxes ahead of time while they're waiting on an opportunity to sell their inventory. That was what the fix that the good chairman of revenue was trying to talk about. And that fix is still in there, but the same people that asked for that fix have asked for this one here as well. So again, I ask for your favorable consideration and an aye vote on this division.
Representative Hornock, do you want the last bite at the apple on your division? Question being called. All those in favor of Division 2 to third reading amendment number 3 to Senate File 42 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. Division 2 has failed. We are now on third reading amendment number 1. Representative Yin.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Members, I move third reading amendment number 1 to Senate File 42 and ask for your favorable consideration, and I will withdraw the amendment at the appropriate time. So members, the reason I bring up this amendment was because of that fairness issue on whether we should treat premium cigars differently than regular cigar shops. So I understand the good chairman of revenue talking about us trying to fix a problem, but I worry about us introducing new problems with the bill where we create a different set of rules for folks who own premium cigar shops versus those who own regular cigar shops. So I would ask you to vote against the bill for the amendment, and I hope that we have a good discussion on whether it makes sense to really treat premium cigars differently.
Chairman Newsom for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am for the amendment against the bill. I think we need to be careful as a policy debate, whether we are going to carve out niche markets to treat especially. In a little bit of research I was able to do, where there are 14 states that have a lower tax than we do. There are 2 states that have no tax at all on cigars. And there are 3 states, and 2 states are the same as ours at 20%. The highest one I found is 95%. In some states, 92, 93 were common. And so I think that being at a disadvantage, maybe we should just have no tax. If we're gonna carve out stuff, I mean, I think that probably the people in the states that are selling online probably have no state tax on these premium cigars. And if we want to get into that competition, let's have that discussion. But I'm on and against this bill, on and in favor of the amendment. Thank you.
Chairman Harshman for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, and I appreciate your comments, good Madam Chairman. And just want to bring us back to what we're trying to fix here. And if you go to page 2 of the bill, you can see the 20% on line 16. That is of the wholesale price. Currently, you have a $100 cigar, you have to remit that 20% right now to the Department of Revenue. That's a tobacco tax. It's been referred to as a sin tax in here. And then if you go to page 3 of the bill, line 3, it says, if you buy it online, it's 10% of the retail. So it's a little bit of different apples and oranges, but 20% versus 10%. So what we're trying to do then is make this more of a fair playing field for our brick and mortar stores in Wyoming. And these are specialty type shops. These aren't the little plastic tip cigars you can get at any little convenience store. These are a place you go for the experience. So we're trying to level that playing field a little bit. And then so we're on the tax rate, but then also when you remit the tobacco tax at the point when it's sold, just like you do the sales tax. So that's really what we're trying to do. The other part, as far as carve outs, all those kind of things, we do that a lot. It's what we do here. And if you look at our revenue, our tax statutes, they're full of carve outs. And so we're just trying to keep things fair. And that's probably the number one hallmark of taxation. Is it fair? And this work never ends. It'll continue. And I think this is a good compromise to kind of move forward on a niche market to provide some fairness. So I appreciate your support for the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the sponsor? Representative Yin. Oh, Chairman Newsom.
Mr. Chairman, as far as the remitting tax on the purchase, I believe all of our liquor stores and all of our liquor vendors do that same thing. I believe they pay upfront the tax when they get the product. And so I think that's a fair way to do it and a assurance that the tax will get paid in a timely manner. Thank you.
Chairman Harshman for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate the Madam Chair bringing that up. And first of all, I want to say one thing I forgot. This conversation has been really good with the Wyoming businesses who are in this market because they have informed our Department of Revenue of more and more of these online retailers. So, that's part of the issue. Does the tax online get remitted? So all that, this has been really good. As far as the liquor, and we're a control state. So if you own a liquor store and you buy a bottle of liquor, that is part of the purchase price. You don't buy the bottle for $10 and then have to remit a $5 liquor tax. Whatever the price is the price, and it's all one deal. And so there's not a separate liquor tax to that. So that's all in that 17% markup that we have as a control state. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Yin for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, I think the good chairman of Revenue brought up the thought of fairness. And I guess the question, which is the reason why I brought the amendment at all, was, is this fair? Is it fair to that convenience store on the northeast corner of the state over the state line that they still have to pay 20% wholesale tax on their cigars that they stock in their store when a premium cigar shop only has to pay a 10% wholesale tax? Is it fair to all the truck stops along I-80 that could sell cigars to their clientele that they still have to buy 20% because their cigars don't qualify for a premium cigar 10% rate? And so I guess that's the question to the body, is whether it makes sense to do this for just this specific market of premium cigars, or should we have the same rate for all cigars? And I would submit to you that it's not good policy to say only premium cigars has to pay less taxes when every other person in the state that's selling your normal everyday cigar still has to pay that 20% wholesale tax. So I'll withdraw the amendment and against the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Yin. So, Senate File 42 having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk, please call the roll.
Elleman, Allred, Andrew, Angelos, Banks, Bear, Berger, Brown, Burkhart, Byron, Chadwick, Chestick, Klauston, Conrad, Crago, Davis, Eklund, Haroldson, Harshman, Heiner, Henderson, Warnock, Jennings, Knapp, Larson Lloyd, Larson JT, Lawley, Locke, Nyman, Newsom, Nicholas, Nemec, Northrop, Oakley, Obermuller, O'Hearn, Olson, Ottman, Pendergraft, Penn, Provenza, Rodriguez-Williams, Sherwood, Singh, Slagle, Smith, Stith, Storer, Strock, Stivar, Tarver, Trujillo, Walters, Ward, Washit, Western, Winter, Wiley, Yin, Zwanitzer Dan, Zwanitzer Dave, Speaker Summers. Are there any changes? Are there any changes? Trujillo? Closing vote. Vote closed. 46 aye, 16 no.
Senate File 42 having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, Senate File 42 has passed the House. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I move the House stand in recess until 2:30 p.m.
All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? Motion carries. We stand in recess until 2:30 p.m.